Welcome back to Hot Harmony Summer here on Metal Music Theory, where we get sweaty thinking about chords. I'm really opening the vault on some of my all-time favorite riffs with this series, and this riff, which is my favorite Krallice riff, also happens to be one of my all-time favorite riffs of anything. This riff is from a few minutes into the song from my favorite Krallice album, Years Past Matter. I'm going to step out of my lane for a second and do some amateur musicology, if you'll forgive me. From where I'm listening, Krallice kind of has three periods so far. Their first several albums were minimalist, cold, long-form, repetitive black metal. Their middle albums, starting probably with IIIIIIII, are modernist, cryptic, less repetitive, more dissonant, and more technical. And then their current period, which crystallized, pun intended, probably with crystalline exhaustion, is something else, something more tonal, synthy, cosmic sounding, maybe vaguely romantic in the use of harmony. Years Past Matter comes at the transition point between the first and second periods, and this riff in particular is a really cool blend between these two aesthetic paradigms. There are two mostly independent guitar parts in this riff. The higher, more audible one sounds like this. Subtler supporting one sounds like this. Both of these guitar parts use four very short motives. First, there's this descending 3-2-0 line. Then there's a descending major second in this eighth quarter rhythm. Then there's this small undulating scale run. And finally, there's this descending third. These tiny motives are part of both guitar parts. Here they are in the higher guitar part. And the cool thing is that the second guitar part uses the same motives, but cycles through them faster, messes with the durations, displaces them in pitch, and loops some of them. This creates this cool texture where we get different versions of the same motives kind of cascading over each other until they all line up together in the second half. Here they are at the same time with clean guitars and no tremolo picking, with the motives highlighted. So that's a horizontal way of thinking about things, highlighting the ways that the individual melodic lines hang together. But when we talk about harmony, that typically means also talking about how these notes line up vertically, like what's happening at the same time. The cool thing here is that this turbulent sea of overlapping motives leads to this turbulent, primordial sounding harmony. We're definitely in E minor. The main version of the first motive goes G, F sharp, E, or 3-2-1, which is a clear way to establish a minor key. And every note in the riff, except for one, is in this key. But what's cool is that it's kind of a blurry E minor, which has all the intensity of tonal harmony without really playing by those rules. Part of this blurriness comes from the fact that the two layers are not really aligned. While the upper guitar part is doing the 3-2-1 motive in E minor, the lower part is doing that same motive but faster and in A minor. Another part of this blurriness comes from using overlapping chords. Near the end of the riff, we get another even more intense 3-2-1 descent in E minor in the upper guitar, which feels like the moment of tonal closure. But when we add the lower guitar part and continue listening, what we get is this restless, ambiguous shifting between E minor and its two most closely related chords, C major and G major, and then we sit on B minor, the minor 5 chord, before circling back to the beginning. So it doesn't really sound like we reach a point of rest. Instead, we kind of dissolve when we get to this moment that feels like it should be the moment of closure. Between these two blurry moments, we get some intense but slightly unconventional tonal harmony. The one place we do get the leading tone, D sharp, in this riff, it's also not treated in a traditional way. It doesn't resolve up by step, and instead it sits into this F sharp diminished chord. The way I hear it, the harmony gets kind of broken or stretched or torn apart at this moment, and this tension doesn't get resolved immediately. Instead, it charges the main melodic line of the riff, and when it finally comes back together, it resolves to this blurry E minor. All this adds up to this riff where these two uncoordinated layers dance against each other and echo and foreshadow each other, only to kind of melt into each other and into this rich primordial soup before circling back to where they started. Writing this video has made me think, for the billionth time since committing to the music theory bit, about what the purpose of harmonic analysis actually is. I was a physics major in undergrad, and one of my textbooks told me that you really just learn how to do quantum physics math, but you won't ever really understand what quantum physics is. I think that's kind of similar to what harmonic analysis is. You learn how to do it, first as an unnecessarily complicated and idiosyncratic set of labels for things, and then as a set of patterns that are often mistaken for rules, and then finally as a methodology and language for noticing things about a piece of music and maybe comparing it to other pieces of music. This is all pretty cool, and there's plenty that comes out of it that enriches my hearing and helps bring my attention to details that I wouldn't have heard otherwise, and that spurs creativity in composition, and that helps me notice links between different pieces of music. But it also always feels like harmony or harmonic analysis is talking around the music, even if it's as precise and direct as we can get in language for talking about pitch. What I'm getting at is that some of the sentence that I like that I said earlier about how the riff is a dance between two motives that are both echoes of future versions of each other, coming to a head of tension only to melt into a rich primordial soup, are not only indispensable to harmonic analysis, but are in some ways more important than the abstract labeling games. In other words, and I don't know exactly who this advice is for, I guess maybe it's for undergrad music majors, but I think it's really important to have an idea of what the big picture feels like when you're doing harmonic analysis, and then sharpen this picture with specific observations about how the notes hang together. The other thing I really like about this particular riff, unrelated to harmony, is the fact that we only hear it once. Or I guess we get it twice in a row, but that's it for the whole song. It's such an intense, goosebumps-causing 45 seconds or so, and Krallice, in their infinite gnomic wisdom, are so miserly with it. It's buried deep in the middle of this enormous album, and we only hear it twice in a row and then never again. I one time had a guest lecture in undergrad from Claude Michel Schoenberg, who is not the composer Arnold Schoenberg, who has been dead for 70 years. Claude Michel Schoenberg is the composer of the score for Les Miserables. It was a really interesting lecture, not only because we learned that he doesn't read music, but the moment that stuck with me was him explaining in a thick French accent that it is very important to be generous with music. Except from what he explained, he meant the opposite of generous. He talked about how powerful it is to withhold your really good musical ideas and use them only sparingly. I think that's what's happening here. This poignant, powerful riff shows up for less than a minute in this colossal album by a band that, until this point, had no problem with repeating a single riff for minutes at a time. This seems to be in line with Krallice's overall aesthetic, in that their music generally seems to be unconcerned with the humans who listen to it. As my friend, the excellent writer about music Ron, put it in a micro review that I'll link in the description, Krallice are like redwoods in the forest. Their music simply is, and it doesn't care if you are there to perceive it. That's kind of how this riff feels. It's like witnessing a meteor shower, a brief moment of overwhelming beauty, but one that feels both fundamentally inhuman and is very rare. Pretty cool thing for some dudes from Queens to pull off, if you ask me. Go listen to Krallice. Their music has never failed to floor me if I put the time into it. See ya.